Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast State of the Balance with me, your host, Imperial Dane. The last State of the Balance, by the way, of this year, since, next month, it's January 2016. So that's only been happening quite a bit here this year. A lot of larger series of balance changes. The balance been sort of in a lot of different places, and sort of I think it's a bit of a more interesting spot here by, the end of the year than it was, I think, at the start of it. So, where are we? With the Americans, I think we're getting into a more interesting place. There's some more divergent strategies. Rifle Company has finally been unseated after, I believe, more or less over a year there of basically triumphant domination of the Americans. I mean, some still use it, but it's no longer the go-to, the primary one. And we're actually beginning to see airborne being used. Airborne, which hasn't really seen any greater use in some time. Armors being utilized. Tactical weapons. Heavy cavalry. Overall, we're seeing more sort of diverse American strategies. Beyond that, not so much has changed. There's still sort of a bit more, captains, lieutenant. We're seeing more weapon rack usage, more BARs, more bazookas. Also good grenade usage, somewhat. Smoke usage, hit and miss with some players, really. But, we're sort of seeing more paths there. Still, I think the most common one is going for captain, maybe lieutenant, or just captain there. And it does tend to leave a lot more American players a bit more clumsy. I mean, the captain's sort of dealing well for sort of certain elements, for sort of opponents more gone for dug in, but he can't really sort of quickly react to things, and he can't really push an advantage. So if you sort of send your American player go for this, well, the one you're playing against, you might have some advantage in sort of trying to push against him in certain elements, because he's going to be struggling if he's not careful. Because again, it does lack speed, and it does lack just sort of raw firepower compared to the platoon command post, which can sort of really quickly push you forwards. And of course, mines. And again, most American players at the moment just don't seem to realise they've got mines. And again, that's probably one of the areas to sort of need to work on. In terms of balance issues, I'm not so sure there's really much there that per se needs it. It's a bit hard to sort of talk about that. And I think overall they're performing quite well. I think it's more of an issue of the Americans just need to figure out how to use what they got, because they've only got plenty. They're just not quite fully utilising it, I would argue, in a sense. I mean, there's some bits in there. We've even seen some players beginning to use mechanized. Really, that ought to, I think, say something about the American state of play again. It's actually going somewhere, and there's sort of, again, more paths being taken, which again I think is overall a sign of healthiness, really. For the Brits, well, they've certainly suffered a bit. They think they got some underserved nerfs for some reason. They became a bit easy to hit. They suffered a bit for them, but they seem sort of bouncing back. Also, I think they've struggled a bit there with the sort of new Orbital Command Vest, and we'll get there. Overall, I don't think so much else. Again, it's just they need to sort of figure out how to sort of play it. Of course, there's some other elements that might have been hitting them a bit hard there. I'm a bit unsure of how to sort of balance them, because the ability to sort of quickly tech up. I'm not entirely sure what to suggest there. Maybe make sort of the armoured car and the buffers upgrades a bit sort of cheaper, so they're actually a bit cheaper to reach, and so they can actually be utilised a bit more effectively. They might in fact be a bit too expensive at the moment. Beyond that, it's sort of a bit more tricky, because I think if you go with the Brits, so just buff something uncarefully, you can sort of quickly get a snowball effect with them. So I'm rather cautious then. Most of them currently just going Vanguard and special weapons against them, go for the Crocodile. I mean, despite being nerfed and more expensive, there's still a lot of players going for that. I mean, they still need to sort of figure out, I think, also to some extent, just the rest of the Doctor, because the Brits have a lot of great tools, also Doctor, and the most of the time, they're just not using it. So, I mean, there's also some work there that needs to be done. They're just on the British players on themselves, which they probably don't want to, and of course need someone to guide them their head sort of towards it. But I know. I mean, again, make the buffers and the AC upgrade a bit cheaper. Maybe the same for, like, say, hammer, anvil, just a bit, though. Maybe even just hammer, not anvil, because that's got a lot going for it. And I'd probably say that's about fine at the moment. Beyond that, I'm a bit sort of afraid to sort of touch that. So it's also looking better. We're seeing a bit more variety now. It's not just Shock Rifle, which also been slightly unseated a bit as from its point of domination. You can see a bit of partisan play, but mostly sort of just guards, or well, something with Shock Rifle. Of course, it's not really there. Overall, they still got plenty of options in terms. I mean, you can probably expect a lot of conscripts. You can expect scout cars, you can expect Maxims, mortars. You'll see more T-70s, T-34-76s, S-76s, A half-tracks. I mean, overall, you're seeing a lot more from the Surge. Again, a sign of something good amongst the players, but of course also a bit with the faction itself. So there's a bit harder sort of remark upon things. I do think the A35 needs to sort of be changed. Either it needs to be cheaper to sort of match the price, because currently it's basically a more expensive Stuke G which doesn't really add up since it actually has less functionality than the Stuke G and very few sort of real advantages, but it's actually notably more expensive. So that needs to be either made cheaper, or the performance needs to match the price tag. Either of those two needs to happen. Otherwise, I think the SU-85 is not going to see that much. I mean, it's still a pretty good tank destroyer, but in terms of sort of, what you actually get for your money, I do think the price tag is currently a bit off, to be honest. That's something that needs to be looked into. Penal troops could probably also do for some small tweaks. A bit harder sort of to put them on there. Maybe consider not just having a flamethrower upgrade, but a sort of second series of upgrades. Maybe some light machine gun upgrades or some such. Just another thought there as well, sort of try and broaden them out a bit more on what they can do and their worth. Beyond that, with the Surge, there's not so much else to comment on. Again, when playing them, I'm feeling in a pretty good state. Again, they got plenty of cheap tanks, they got assault guns, tank destroyers, strong support weapons. I mean, there's not really so much there to sort of really complain about, unless you're playing them wrong, I feel anyways. Of course, this is my experience being a top 100 with the Soviets, so take that with how much assault you want. And then, of course, we come to the Germans. The Oberkommanders have really been the ones who, again, benefited from the last series of patch. Again, they sort of became, a lot more efficient, a lot more fun to play. It has, of course, still not really changed the Volksgrenadier spam thing, because, again, they didn't remove the bloody Panzerschrecks. It's still a 5-man squad with Panzerschrecks. Even their notes when they sort of seem to mention the Sturmpanzers getting it, but they haven't done it. Just move the Panzerschrecks to the Sturmpioneers. Problem fixed. It's not just going to be Volksgrenadier spam all day, even if they're more expensive. If they're still a 5-man Panzerschreck squad, they're going to be a problem. They need to fix that. Also, secondly, they need, I think, to sort of just take away the reinforcement from the battle group headquarters. It just doesn't fit with the flow of the Oberkommando West and needs to something. Again, they're supposed to be an aggressive early game faction, yet the battle group headquarters completely plays against that. Take it away and give them some kind of half-track or truck or the Kubelwagen some kind of reinforcement upgrade, so command Kubel, and leave it at that. You can still then have them say move it up to the battle group headquarters, have full reinforcement at such point, but you can then actually knock the reinforcement part up pretty quickly and then sort of deal with it that way. Again, it just, I think, leads to some better play and also more, again, aggressive tactics. The current thing, again, just leads to static and, again, completely opposed to sort of what the Oberkommando is supposed to play according to Relic. So, take that away while we're at it. In terms of how they play, again, we are seeing sort of varied strategies, but again, I'm still seeing a lot of Volksgrenadier spammers. I mean, that thing needs to change. I mean, again, just take away the Panzerschreck Relic. They got a Kettenwerfers that are super cheap and are pretty solid, can cloak. And still the Sturmpioneers are pretty neat, giving them the Panzerschreck. It's not going to be the end of the Third Reich. I mean, obviously that was caused by other reasons, but, you get the metaphor, I hope. So I think they basically need to do that with the Oberkommando West. That way, maybe sneak in some other upgrade to the Volksgrenadiers, maybe a sort of a LMG-34, obviously not Obersoldaten stats, but again, remember, troops can have the same weapon with different stats. That's the case with the Obersoldaten Volksgrenadier, have a really overpowered LMG-34. If the Volksgrenadiers were to get one, they get a lot less powerful. Or maybe, some kind of assault rifle upgrade that only works, if you use an ability somewhat, I don't know. Anyways, fix them, and they probably also work a lot better in certain senses, and probably also be a lot more interesting to play against. I think that's really one of the bigger headaches there. I mean, it was also good they sort of quickly fixed out the whole thing with the Panther Force and Panther were too expensive. That's actually something remarked upon in the patch notes, the first place sort of time they made the video about it. That's too bloody cheap, or at least I hope I did. I'm pretty sure I meant to. And thankfully that was fixed, though perhaps a bit too late there. The rule does again lead to sort of a bit more better flow in some senses. Overall, though, it's primarily just battle group headquarters. We are seeing some mechanized regiment players, but they're a bit more in the minority after sort of the initial shock effect went over, and most players pretty much easily figured out how to counter the Lukes. But again, remove the Panzerschreck, replace it with something else, LMG-34, Sturmgewehr, something, and give it to the Sturmpioneers, the Panzerschreck instead. Overall, I think that should lead to a better then. And I think for the Sturmpioneers, just move the concussor grenade, just being regularly available. It doesn't make sense. It requires Veterancy 3. It does not make sense at all for the Sturmpioneers. It is not some kind of super powerful thing that needs to be locked away. It's really weird. And again, in that sense, I think still they need to look at a lot of the Oberkommando West veterancy, because a lot of it still doesn't make sense. Stuka Fuss, pretty much, first 2 levels of veterancy, it's all you care about. The rest 3 are pointless. So I mean, even they sort of nerf veterans to 5-4 in some sense, it's not going to matter because veterans 1 and 2 is where the goal is all at when it comes to the Stukas of Fus, and that rather carries over to a lot of the units. The Oberkommando S veterans is still a bit wonky with a bunch of them. So that's definitely something that still needs to be looked into with the Oberkommando West. Flammenhetzer might actually benefit it though. I'm not sure, I need to test it a bit more, but one match I had seemed to perform a bit better, partly because again it doesn't need as absurdly much experience as it did before. Beyond that, with the Oberkommando West, it's a bit harder to sort of pinpoint. Again, we'll need more time to play with it, more time for people to counter out strategies and so on. I mean, that's always something that happens, the mind games, the strategy, the tactics, how to play them, how to play against them. I mean, overall, it's sort of largely, a lot of Jaeger, because scavenge, is good. Luftwaffe ground forces, some fortification, a bit of special operations, Firestorm, Overwatch. I mean, after Overwatch seems to sort of, stop being free, it just seems to drop down. It's handy, but it's perhaps not quite what people are looking for in some senses. Beyond that, there's not so much that's coming on with the Oberkommando West. And then, of course, we finally move on to the Wehrmacht, which is also still the one that has sort of variety again. Still think Wehrmacht Tier 2 seems a bit weak. I think the half-track needs some kind of buff. I mean, there was a brief period there where everybody was using flamethrower half-tracks, and now basically no one's using it. Something's not adding up there. I think it needs something extra than just a regular half-track as well. Some kind of buff. Hard to say, probably not durability, but just actual effect. Maybe give it the ability to support troops around it, say it moves slower, but troops around it get some kind of buff. A bit like combined arms, but not doctrinal in a sense, and again focused around a vehicle specifically. I think that was sort of sense more again the German sort of mechanized infantry stuff they actually had going. So that would be an option anyways. Otherwise, not so much else to say. Their Grenadiers probably could do with something, made more expensive, but also buffed in one way or the other. I think they need something a bit extra there. And of course we got the Osttruppen, which rather again are seeing a lot of play there. Some players actually like to go for it again with the Osttruppen openings. And the question is, of course, perhaps they're just a bit too durable for what they do. Just a bit too durable, a bit too tough, a bit too absorbent, and perhaps just need to be a bit easier to hit to some other kind of small nerve. It certainly is a bit disconcerting to see some players just constantly use them without necessarily too much repercussion. So the Osttruppen could perhaps do with a small nerve, and again I'm thinking just making it a bit easier to hit or lowering the output somehow, but not too much, otherwise they'll just vanish away again. But beyond that, I just think it's sort of tier 2 of the Wehrmacht that sort of needs to look into. They like the mechanized company, their vehicles specifically, somehow just to make it a bit more useful, because the Wehrmacht can still very easily get penned in and they can sort of have a very hard time pushing back out from it again. Elite troops are seeing more usage thanks to the Stormtroopers. Oh, it's a Spearhead, a Lightning Wall, very popular still. Basically anything with G43 does see some usage since it allows the gunners to more quickly and at a lower cost increase the firepower versus the enemy. Mobile defense is also still popular, and still leads to a lot of players basically losing because they just rely on the call-ins too much, and basically and that's it really. Any sort of decent armor play in return will basically knock them out of the war. Beyond that, with the Wehrmacht, there's not so much to comment on. Perhaps also making the tier 4 a bit cheaper. It's still a thing expensive to reach, and a lot of players tend to end up hurting themselves and end up just losing their fight. I mean, it's almost close to just being, if you go for it straight away, you might actually just lose the game. And certainly it shouldn't be just, no-brainer, but perhaps make it a bit cheaper. Either that, or they need to sort of make the Panther a bit more useful. Perhaps taking a bit more sort of the route of the, I don't know, comets and EC8s and so on, just giving a bit extra splash damage so it can actually work a bit better versus infantry as well. A thought there, but beyond that, there's not really much else to do with the Panther except just making it even better versus vehicles, which is just going to make it ridiculous. So, I mean, it's hard to say really what to do about the Panther. It's in an awkward spot. It's in an awkward spot in some senses with the Wehrmacht. With the Oberkommando is pretty decent, but with the Wehrmacht, it just sort of, it has a hard time really shining. You're feeling like, being more worth it than a Panzer IV, in particular more Panzer IVs. So there's a bit of an oddity there as well. Beyond that, it's not so much for Wehrmacht to sort of comment on again, sort of to expound upon yet. But again, I do think the issue is still Wehrmacht Tier 2. Maybe the Grenadiers in some way or the other need some kind of look into. Maybe, but again, if they are going to get anything, they're going to have to get it with a price increase as well to sort of cut down on Grenadier spam that way. Otherwise, it's just going to get really, really dumb very quickly. I mean, they somehow need to also, be required more to use the support weapons. In that sense, perhaps the trick is to just sort of work with some of their veterancy abilities and bonuses, sort of rework them, and some other bits there. perhaps create some kind of greater unity with the rest of the units. Beyond that, I think that's sort of really covers here in sort of December. Been a lot going on this month, and thus it's sort of a bit hard to sort of comment on, because all of a sudden they sneak in some changes here, hot fixes that overhaul a lot of things, and then they re-hot fix something, because then they make the Brits a bit too weak, and it's a bit like, good lord, a lot's happening here. And of course it also means, all of a sudden things are shifting very rapidly, which also means they're a bit more tricky to keep track of. But I mean, overall, Americans, Soviets looking reasonably well, Brits struggling in some elements, or not so many players playing them, hard to say why. Bit balanced perhaps, but I think it's also more a mentality issue, and it's always something that requires someone to just really kick through with them in the first place, sort of really catch off with, or they need to become kind of ridiculous buff so people get confidence in them, because, well, let's not go there. And for the Germans, Oberkommando is strong again. Some things just need to be sort of dealt with. Focus on his Panzerschrecks, Belgrove headquarters need to stop reinforcing. Wehrmacht, Osttroppen, I think needs something, but again, Wehrmacht tier 2 and perhaps the Grenadiers need some looking into for some kind of, deeper changes there. So hopefully this helps. I'll help you here this last month of the year. Hopefully it gives some different matches, some thoughts, some strategy, again, sort of help with what you're dealing with, and perhaps also some strategy and tactics. Anyways, we'll of course see what comes in the new year, what sort of things we can look forward to, what balance changes and what not. So see you all there, and of course keep watching the other videos I'll be coming up here, of course. So thank you all, and see you. Bye.